Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed. Tables were full, yet Evelyn stood alone at the entrance, dressed in power, denied a seat like she didn't belong. The manager's smile was thin, rehearsed, final. Around her, comfort was reserved for others. Across the room, a black father sat with his child, watching silence turn into humiliation. The air tightened when the manager leaned in and snapped, "This place isn't for you." That was the moment everything shifted. Because the man they dismissed and the woman they underestimated were about to expose a mistake no one in that room could undo. Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Subscribe for more raw stories that refuse to stay silent. Evelyn had spent her life inside systems that worked exactly as designed. Boardrooms, contracts, security teams that moved before she spoke. As the CEO of a powerful global firm, she was used to being accommodated, not questioned. Her schedule was precise, her presence respected, her name enough to open doors. Evelyn Monroe didn't see herself as privileged, she saw herself as prepared. Control had always been her shield, and distance her safety. That distance followed her everywhere. Even on nights meant for celebration, she moved alone, surrounded by people who needed her but never truly knew her. She trusted structure, not connection. Systems didn't disappoint. People did. Across the city, Darius lived a life that required no illusion of control, only endurance. His days were built around responsibility, not recognition. Work, transit, homework, dinner. Repeat. Raising his daughter alone after loss had taught him discipline without bitterness. Darius Coleman didn't expect fairness. He expected obstacles, and he planned his life around surviving them. Lena believed her father could handle anything. She watched the world through his calm, unaware of how often he carried weight so she wouldn't have to. The absence of her mother still lingered in quiet moments, in habits that never fully faded. Aisha Coleman was gone, but her presence lived on in the way Darius showed up every day without complaint. That night, the restaurant represented two Americas sharing the same space but not the same rules. Velvet ropes disguised as policies. Courtesy measured by status. Comfort rationed by who was deemed worthy. The atmosphere felt polished, but the hierarchy underneath was sharp. The manager moved through the room with practiced authority, deciding who belonged without ever saying the words out loud. Richard Halvorson didn't see people. He saw categories, and he enforced them with confidence. Evelyn arrived believing the system would recognize her. Darius sat already knowing it wouldn't. Neither of them expected the moment their paths would collide. Neither of them knew the room had already chosen sides. And once that line was crossed, this wouldn't end with quiet disappointment. It would end with exposure. The room did not explode into conflict. It tightened instead, like a space slowly losing oxygen. Evelyn remained standing near the entrance, posture composed, hands still, refusing to shrink. She had faced pressure before, but this was different. This wasn't negotiation. It was erasure. The longer she stood there, the clearer it became that politeness was being used as a wall. Every passing second turned her presence into an inconvenience that needed correcting. Richard moved with deliberate calm, the kind that came from knowing the room would back him. Richard Halvorson had learned how to enforce rules without naming them. His authority wasn't loud yet, but it was absolute. Each glance he gave the staff carried instruction. Each pause signaled permission to ignore. Darius noticed how the air changed. He felt it before he fully understood it, the way he always did. This was the moment when something invisible turned dangerous. He shifted slightly, instinctively placing himself between Lena and the tension. Darius Coleman had lived long enough inside unfair systems to recognize when silence was about to be weaponized. Lena looked around, confused by the stillness. She sensed something wrong, even if she didn't have the words. People were watching, but not helping. Adults who laughed freely minutes ago now stared into glasses or menus, desperate not to be seen choosing a side. Richard spoke again, louder this time, the mask slipping just enough. "You've been told there's nothing available. Stop making this difficult." The sentence wasn't just for Evelyn. It was for the room. A reminder of who controlled outcomes. Evelyn turned toward him fully. Her voice stayed steady, but something hardened beneath it. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for basic respect." The response didn't come from Richard alone. It came from the silence that followed. No one nodded. No one murmured agreement. The system answered for him. That was when Darius stood, not to challenge, not to perform, just to refuse disappearance. "I have an extra chair," he said, clear and calm. "She can sit with us." The reaction was immediate and sharp. Head snapped up. A ripple moved through the room. Not approval, but alarm. Darius had crossed a line. The space depended on people never crossing. Richard's expression tightened. His patience evaporated. "Sit down," he said coldly. "This doesn't concern you." Lena's fingers curled into her father's sleeve. She felt the shift too. The moment kindness became defiance. Darius didn't move. He looked directly at the manager. "It concerns anyone who's being humiliated." That was the moment bystanders became complicit. Servers froze. Security hovered closer. No one corrected the tone. No one asked questions. Silence began doing its work. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way that felt more threatening than shouting. "You don't belong in this conversation." The words hit with practiced cruelty. Familiar. Efficient. Evelyn felt anger rise not just for herself, but for what she was witnessing. She saw how easily dignity could be stripped when authority decided you were out of place. She saw how quickly courage isolated the person showing it. Lena finally spoke, her voice small but cutting through the tension. "Why are you being mean?" The room stiffened. A few people looked away in shame. Others pretended not to hear. Richard ignored her completely. Security took another step forward, positioning themselves closer to Darius than the manager. The message was clear. Resistance would be corrected. Richard straightened, confidence sharpening into something uglier. "This place is not for people who don't know their role." That was the line, the one that stripped away any remaining ambiguity. Darius felt heat rise in his chest, controlled but powerful. He thought of Aisha, of how she used to say, "Silence was how injustice survived." Aisha Coleman had taught him that dignity wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to disappear. He looked at Lena, then back at the room. "I know my role," he said quietly. "I'm standing in it." The tension thickened. The room waited, not for truth, but for authority to decide how far this would go. Richard inhaled, preparing to end it the way he always did. Security shifted their weight, ready to act. Bystanders held their breath, hoping the moment would resolve itself without demanding anything from them. Evelyn realized something then. This wasn't about who she was. It was about who was allowed to take up space and who was expected to vanish when told. And somewhere in that tightening silence, the mistake was still growing. Unseen, uncontained, and far from finished. The room hardened into something unrecognizable. Security edged closer to Darius, close enough that Lena felt it and leaned into his side. No hands were on him yet, but the intention was clear. Control still lived with the manager, and everyone knew it. Richard stood near the aisle, posture straight, expression composed, already rehearsing how this would end. In places like this, endings were predictable. Evelyn stayed where she was, breath measured, face calm. The humiliation had passed its peak and turned into something colder. She wasn't pleading anymore. She was watching how quickly people accepted cruelty once it was authorized. She saw how silence protected power better than noise ever could. Richard glanced around, making sure the room was with him. It was. Servers froze. Guests looked away. The system had aligned. Then he spoke, loud enough to settle it. "This is over. Remove him." No one moved right away. The pause irritated him. He took a step forward, ready to reassert himself, when the rhythm of the room broke. Not with a shout, but with a sound that didn't belong. A monitor near the wall changed its tempo. Not an alarm, just a shift, enough to draw eyes. Evelyn felt it first. A pressure lifting, a narrowing becoming space. Her fingers twitched against the fabric of her coat. She didn't open her eyes yet. She didn't need to. She listened. Darius saw the movement and stilled completely, as if reacting would break it. Lena noticed too, eyes widening, breath caught. A few people leaned in without realizing it, curiosity slipping past their caution. Richard didn't turn around. He didn't want interruptions. "Now," he snapped, the edge of panic sneaking into his voice. That impatience exposed him. The monitor changed again, louder, faster. Someone whispered. A phone lifted, not hidden this time. The air shifted from obedience to attention. Evelyn opened her eyes. The room froze. She took a slow breath, pain flashing across her face, but clarity settling behind her gaze. She turned her head, not toward the manager, but toward the man standing between authority and his child. "I heard everything," she said. "It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be." Richard spun around. The color drained from his face before he could stop it. "You're not fully aware," he said quickly. "You don't understand." Evelyn Monroe pushed herself upright just enough to be undeniable. "I understand exactly what was said," she replied, her eyes locked on him. "I heard you decide who mattered, and I heard how easily you erased him." Phones were up now, not one or too many. The room leaned forward as a single body. Richard's composure fractured. He took a step back, then corrected himself, trying to recover the posture that had always protected him. "This doesn't need to be public," he said, voice tight. "We can handle this properly." Darius finally spoke, his voice steady, grounded. "You already handled it. We're just seeing it." That was the moment the balance tipped, but it didn't collapse all at once. The room hesitated, recalibrating. Authorities searched for something to hold on to. Evelyn turned to security, her voice firm. "Do not touch him," she said. "If anyone needs to be escorted, it isn't him." No one moved. Richard Halvorsen looked around and realized the room no longer answered to him. The confidence that had carried him minutes ago drained into something brittle. His breathing changed. His hands fidgeted. Fear crept in where certainty had lived. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered. Evelyn shook her head. "No, this is documentation." She glanced at Lena, then back at Darius Coleman. "You stood when silence was easier," she said. "That matters." Security shifted not toward Darius, but away from him, toward the manager. The room exhaled, not in relief, but in recognition. People weren't cheering. They were realizing. Watching power fail in real time does that. Richard took another step back, voice low, almost pleading. "We can fix this." Evelyn's answer was calm, final. "You already showed us who you are." Phones kept recording. No one looked away. Power hadn't just shifted. It had been exposed. And exposure doesn't fade quietly. The consequences came swiftly, without ceremony. By morning, Richard Halvorsen no longer carried authority in that restaurant, or anywhere connected to it. Access badges were deactivated. His name vanished from internal systems before explanations could be rehearsed. An investigation followed, not quiet, not negotiable. Statements were taken. Footage was preserved. The confidence that once protected him collapsed into absence. There was no apology tour, no graceful exit, just removal. Final and irreversible. Evelyn recovered steadily, but what changed her most wasn't physical. It was clarity. She didn't issue press releases or accept sympathy. She acted. Contracts were frozen. Oversight expanded. Policies rewritten by people who had been ignored before. Dignity returned, not because she was powerful, but because she refused to let power hide. Evelyn Monroe had been heard when she spoke, but she made sure others would be heard when they did. For Darius, the shift was quieter and deeper. He returned to his routine without lowered eyes. The way people addressed him changed. Requests replaced commands. Silence no longer followed him like a shadow. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't need it. Standing had already done its work. Darius Coleman went home that night knowing his daughter had seen something rare, accountability. Lena noticed first, her father's posture, the way his shoulders finally relaxed. The promise he made to never disappear felt real now. Aisha Coleman was gone, but her lesson remained. Dignity survives when people refuse to shrink. Weeks later, Evelyn walked into a small literacy center far from velvet ropes and curated comfort. Grace Miller didn't recognize her at first. She didn't need to. The work mattered more than names. Books were outdated. Volunteers were stretched thin. Evelyn showed up anyway, quietly, consistently. Not to fix everything, just to be present. Grace Miller welcomed her without ceremony, and that simplicity changed more than any headline could. This wasn't a soft ending. It was a necessary one. The system didn't learn compassion. It learned fear. Fear of being seen, recorded, and challenged. That's how injustice retreats. Not through regret, but through consequences that can't be erased. The truth is uncomfortable. Moments like this happen every day. Most end in silence. This one didn't because someone stood, someone listened, and someone refused to look away. The question isn't whether racism still exists. It's how often it survives, because people with power assume no one is watching. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Black Community Struggles for stories that confront injustice head on and tap like to help these voices travel further.